Thank you. Welcome to everyone again. This is the first of 3 international roundtable discussions that are being held as part of the Energy Institute's Generation 2050 initiative that's in the lead up to COP26. So of course, these events are a bit different from what you might be used to because they're being chaired by young professionals who are hosting senior figures from the energy industry to discuss global challenges that might be material to all of us here today. My name is Shahda Al-Tai. Proud to be a member of the Young Professionals Network in the Middle East. And you'll also be hearing from myself as well as my colleague Piotr in just a bit. But we'd like to kind of welcome you to today's session and introduce you to some of our distinguished guests who would like to sincerely thank for taking the time and effort to be with us today and share some of their insights across some of the material topics that we'll be discussing today. We'd like to welcome our guests by starting by saying thank you to Mr. Tim Gould, the Chief Energy Economist from the International Energy Agency, as well as His Excellency Dr. Abdul Hussain bin Ali Mirza, President of Sustainable Energy Authority in Bahrain, as well as Mr. Jassim Hussain Thabit, Group Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of Dhaka. Of course, as well, Mr. Binu Parthan, Head of Regions at the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA. So just to give you a bit of a context about what to expect over the course of the session today, it will be a 90-minute session. We'll start by hearing for a few minutes some insights from each of our speakers about how they feel about today's topic, which is, can the Middle East deliver on net zero? And of course, following hearing some of their insights, we'll have an open discussion around some of the key questions that have come up as a result of the Generation 2050 survey, as well as some of the discussions that we've had as young professionals in the region. But before that, we'll be giving you a bit of an insight about Generation 2050 and sharing a bit with you about the manifesto that we've been working on as the Energy Institute. I'd like to also mention that you can feel free to post your questions in the question feature as part of the webinar options. Please drop them there, which will help us to sort through them and direct the relevant questions to the speakers that we have with us today. You can also feel free to continue the conversation outside the webinar by joining us in the hashtag Generation 2050. And sharing your thoughts and insights with the speakers and with all of us as well. For now, I'd like to perhaps ask Piotr to tell us a bit more about Generation 2050 as we discuss a bit more about the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahda. Good afternoon, everyone, and particularly warm welcome to all of our distinguished speakers tonight. My name is Piotr Konopka. I'm a senior manager for energy and decarbonization programs. Day-to-day, I work at DP World, but also alongside Shahda, I'm active within the Energy Institute's Middle East Young Professionals Network, leading our activities here in the region as one of the international branches of the Energy Institute. For those of you in the audience who don't know about it yet, Generation 2050 is a global initiative led by the Energy Institute, Young Professional Network, to amplify young voices in the global discourse around energy and climate topics. I'd like to give you a snapshot of what the Generation 2050 community is like. We are made up of over 1,000 young energy professionals from diverse geographies, sectors, professional backgrounds. We are made up of scientists, engineers, analysts, commercial professionals, and more, coming from places such as London, Lagos, Singapore, San Francisco, really all parts of the globe, and working in oil and gas, through nuclear sector to renewables, energy efficiency, just to name a few of them. Today, we are studying, or we are in the early stages of our careers in the energy sector around the world. Tomorrow, many of us will be in senior roles across the industry, particularly as we are nearing the year 2050. This means that we are going to help lead a sector shaped by decisions made before us or that are being made currently. The actions taken this year are particularly important, both when we talk about COP26, as well as recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. So the actions taken now and in the future will determine the state of the industry and its carbon footprint for many decades to come. Therefore, last year in November 2020, we have published our manifesto, which details how young energy professionals view the progress towards meeting targets and climate change mitigation. The views summarized in that manifesto, which you can access online, and the extracts you'll be seeing on the screen as I speak now, they're pretty hard-hitting. Overall, it's a call for action for governments and energy leaders in particular to take a more decisive action on both universal energy access and climate change mitigation. The manifesto outlines that nearly 3/4 of us fear we will inherit a world that is off track on limiting global temperatures increases to below 2% and meeting the requirements of the Paris Agreement. Personally, one of my favorite parts of the manifesto is that when the young professionals were asked what are the top reasons for choosing to study or working in the energy industry, nearly 60% selected tackling climate change, which is also my personal motivation for doing what I'm doing at DP World. That means that the majority of us care about this challenge enough to let it shape our career choices. And we absolutely are not deterred by the scale of the challenge that it poses. Furthermore, 55% joined the industry because they considered it very dynamic and very interesting. While we see large challenges ahead, many of us are driven by a sense of purpose and excitement about the opportunities in the industry. I think this is a fantastic thing to keep in mind when discussing the urgent need for climate action and also shaping the discussion that's about to take place tonight. Today, we are specifically talking about the risks and opportunities to Middle East economies and the need to act on global climate change, in particular, whether the necessary public policy and investment commitments are in place in the Middle East region to bring about the change at the pace that is required to meet the 2 degrees warming goal by 2050. And as a food for thought for this particular discussion, we're going to kick off with short opening statements from all of our guest speakers. So first up, I'd like to pass it over to Mr. Tim Gould, who's the Chief Energy Economist from the International Energy Agency. Welcome, Tim, and over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Piotr. Thank you very much, Shada. Welcome to all of our distinguished panelists and guests today, and very much appreciate the invitation from the Energy Institute to join you. It is a particular pleasure to be talking with young professionals. I agree strongly with the point that Piotr just made. At IEA, we're very aware that younger generations will inherit the consequences of what we do today. And younger generations also need to be very much recognized as a critical voice in the debate. So that's one of the key reasons why we're very happy to contribute to this discussion as well. And I saw from the slide and also from Piotr's words, this fear that you will inherit a world that is off track for dealing with climate change and reaching sustainable development goals. To be frank, based on everything that we can see today at IEA, those fears are well-founded. There's so much more that needs to be done to get us on track. But back to the topic of today's discussion and this very welcome focus on an exceptionally important region for all of these discussions, and that's the Middle East. I thought in these opening remarks, the best context that I could provide would be to share a few impressions from a ministerial meeting that we hosted earlier today at IEA, or we co-hosted with the Ministry of Energy of Oman. So the title of that ministerial dialogue was on clean energy transitions and economic resilience in the Middle East and North Africa. And I listened in, and it really painted a clear picture of a region that is in the front line for the effects of climate change. Drought, the impacts of changing temperatures on cooling demand, that is already a source of significant strain for some electricity systems in the region, and it may, those kinds of strains may be exacerbated in the future. And you could think of energy-related areas such as the demand for desalinated water as well as something which will be clearly impacted by climate change in the future. And I also felt very clearly the impression that the Middle East is in the front line when it comes to the consequences of actions taken elsewhere on climate. And naturally enough, a big part of that is, what will happen to demand for fossil fuels, for oil and natural gas in particular, as major consumers start to pivot seriously towards net zero. And I was particularly impressed by what we heard from the Deputy Prime Minister of Iraq, Mr. Alawi, where he was speaking about, we have one generation to undertake a major structural shift. And within that generation, these next few years are really crucial. He talked about a 5-year window to really make a decisive move towards a different type of economy, or to build the basis for an economy that is not so dependent on oil. And the importance of active and profitable companies in other sectors. And we also heard from Iraq, but also from ministers in other parts of the region, sort of UAE, Kuwait, but also from North Africa, from Algeria, from Egypt, and from representatives of the private sector, about some of the things that are being done already today that are moving the dial. We talked a lot about solar and the potential in a region that clearly has sort of magnificent levels of solar radiation to take advantage of that resource. I have to say there are some very promising signs there, both in terms of the cost competitiveness of solar and also the progress with the projects made so far. But equally, if you look at the numbers, the Middle East is still at the start of that journey. There is so much more potential there that remains to be tapped. We also heard about efforts to improve the emissions intensity of the traditional fuels, the fuels that are produced today. There was a lot of talk about the importance of eliminating gas flaring, for example, or tackling methane emissions that are associated with that kind of production. But as well as talking about traditional fuels, we talked about low carbon fuels, that will be increasingly in demand as the world changes. And here, as in many energy related discussions, a lot of people return to this question about hydrogen. What role and how quickly will low carbon hydrogen start to play a much more important role in the global energy economy? And where are those competitive advantages, whether for so-called blue or for green hydrogen, that the Middle East would be able to produce, I think, among the cheapest sources of those gases in the world. And there was another element to the discussion, which is always a key point for the IEA, and the opportunity to improve energy efficiency. The data that we collect shows there's a big gap between world averages and the sorts of energy performance that we see in many parts of the Middle East. In our view, these things are not difficult to improve. We don't need to discover new technologies. These are elements that can be implemented, and we've seen examples of how that can happen. I won't go on further into these topics here. I know we'll have the chance to do that in a minute. But the bottom line for our analysis is that as the world moves to net zero, energy in the Middle East should not be seen as part of the problem. In practice, our analysis shows that a well-functioning energy sector in this region as elsewhere, but one that brings a wider range of resources and technologies into play. That can be a durable source of advantage for the Middle East. It can provide the capital and it can provide the know-how that can support more diversified economic growth. And we, of course, recognize that that reform process will be complex and challenging. But we think that change in the energy sector is just inseparable from that process of creating more productive, more innovative, and more sustainable economies in the Middle East. So thank you very much. I look forward to the debate.
Thanks a lot, Tim, for your enthusiasm and support of the young professionals, but also for sharing some of the insights from the ministerial discussions. Thank you for that. I'd now like to ask Your Excellency, Dr. Abdul Hussain Mirza, President of Bahrain Sustainable Energy Authority, who's also actually a fellow of the Energy Institute, an honorary fellow of the Energy Institute, to share some of his thoughts and insights as well.
Thank you very much, Shada, and thank you, Piotr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to all of you. Initially, I would like to thank the Energy Institute for inviting me to speak at this roundtable. I also like to thank my fellow speakers and all the youth who have contributed to the Generation 2050 manifesto and related events. In the run-up to COP26, the involvement of youth is vital. Our actions today will have a lasting impact on the environment we leave for our future generations. And it is only just that they are involved in the decisions making. In my capacity as President of the Sustainable Energy Authority, I report directly to the Cabinet of the Kingdom of Bahrain on the progress we make on our national targets and the roadmap, the two action plans which form the roadmaps on how to achieve the targets. These two national action plans are National Renewable Energy Action Plan and National Energy Efficiency Action Plan. Both these plans have been approved by the Cabinet, and we at the Cabinet then we decide if there are any obstacles we must overcome in reaching them. The point I'm making, if you want to make a change, it has come right from the top. So it has to come from the Cabinet, because if you do it individually or through sections, you will not be able to do it because there will be lots of resistance to change. Nationally, Bahrain is committed to these action plans along with our Vision 2030. His Majesty the King launched a Vision of Bahrain 2030 in 2008. Bahrain also has regional commitments to the GCC, League of Arab States, as well as global commitments. The most relevant to this platform is the Paris Accord, which we are signatory to, which are, all these commitments drive us towards in the hope of achieving more sustainable future with our partners in the public-private sectors, including UNDP, IEA, thank you, Mr. Tim Gould, and IRENA, who I'm glad to see represented here. Bahrain, as many of you will know, is a small, low-lying island state, which makes it particularly at risk of the effect of global warming and sea level rise. In addition, like much of the Middle East, water is a scarce resource, and historically, our economy has relied heavily on fossil fuel revenues. In short, the risks of inaction during the energy transition are tremendous. A loss of fossil fuel-based revenue, loss of land space, loss of drinkable water could all contribute to a decline in quality of life for our citizens. To many, this may sound like a hopeless situation, but to us, this is an inspiration to act. We must embrace modern sustainable energy technologies. We must leverage the amazing engineering skill sets we have in the fossil fuel industry, have developed to innovate further, and we must work hard to tackle climate change head on. Through improving energy efficiency, we reduce waste, associated emissions, and pressure on our energy system and environment. By integrating renewable energy, we are able to provide sustainable energy services to more whilst still reducing environmental impacts associated with energy and preserving the finite natural resources for other industries which need downstream oil and gas products as feedstocks, such as petrochemical processes. To answer the question if the Middle East can deliver on net zero, I would say technically and financially, yes. However, it will require political will, and along with robust mitigation strategies for the impact the transition will have on economies traditionally reliant on fossil fuel revenues. There has been a big shift in the mindset in the recent years on this subject, and you can see many projects coming up in Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other GCC countries, all of them trying to cope with reducing emissions and using more clean energy. So to answer, what should Middle East bring to Glasgow for COP26? We should bring hope, ambition, the full force of our human capital, including the engineering prowess developed over decades of fossil fuel development, and the financial resources needed to meet our targets. Our region has a rich history with conventional energy and also has been blessed with abundant renewable energy resources. This is an opportunity for the region to remain the center of energy even in a more sustainable energy future through ambition, hard work, and innovation. Much work has been done in this regard nationally through our action plans I mentioned earlier. Also regionally, for example, one of the Middle East countries, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, through the initiative of His Highness Mohammed bin Salman, they have the Green Middle East Initiative, which aimed to create a first of its kind regional alliance to introduce Middle East First Pact on climate change, provide an intersection of knowledge and capital, and offer a stage for climate diplomacy to foster the political will needed for transformation change. Another country of the Middle East, the UAE, hosted the 4th of April 2021 this year, a regional dialogue for climate action, which was attended by many decision makers, including Mr. John Kerry from the United States. It was to prepare for a united position in going to COP26. So the Middle East is, I think now there is a change in mindset, and we will be contributing more to COP26. Again, I would like to thank the organizers, my fellow panelists, and the audience for your time and attention, and I look forward to discussing these important and exciting issues further. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for stressing the importance of change, driving that through decision makers, and changing mindsets as well. Thank you for that. I'd now like to ask Mr. Jassim Thabit, Group CEO and MD of TAQA, to share some of his insights and thoughts with us today.
Yeah, thank you to the Energy Institute for organizing this, and it's an honor to be part of this event. And also I'd like to thank my fellow panelists. And I'm really looking forward to addressing the question as to whether the Middle East can really deliver on a net zero. From my perspective, I'm taking a more optimistic view. To me, this represents a golden opportunity to promote economic prosperity, security, and as well a sustainable future for our future generations. Historically, the region has been viewed through an oil and gas lens, I would say, but we've made some significant steps towards the energy transition. We have seen clear commitment throughout the government, through government policies and targets, and more importantly, groundbreaking renewable and clean energy projects throughout the region. The UAE is part of the Paris Climate Accord, and also we have the UAE Energy Strategy 2050 and a water security strategy for 2036. And both of these are roadmaps for a cleaner and a more efficient nation for the future. And from a business perspective and from TAQA's perspective, as an Abu Dhabi integrated utility company, we operate in 11 countries with a diverse portfolio, including operations in oil and gas, and generation of power and water, and transmission and distribution of power and water. But like many others, I mean, we are, as a business or a company, we're going through a transformation. And in March, we set our new strategy for 2030, in which we will become a champion for low carbon power and water. And in summary, I mean, our strategy includes working on our first sustainability report, setting out our current carbon footprint as an entity, and also that will help us identify reduction targets, and putting ESG at the heart and at everything that we do. Also, as part of our strategy is to increase our renewables in our generation portfolio. From currently we're at 5%, and the target is to go up to 30% of our portfolio. And mostly that'll be driven through solar PV. And we're executing on the strategy. I mean, in Abu Dhabi, we have Noor Abu Dhabi, a 1.1 gigawatt solar PV. It's been in operations for 2 years now, and it's currently the world's largest single site, I would say, solar plant. And also under construction, we broke ground a couple of months ago. The next door to that is the Al Dhafra solar project, which is double the size of Noor. It's 2 gigawatts. And it was one of the most cost-efficient power plants in terms of tariff, less than 1.32 cents per kilowatt. And we're expanding also our highly efficient reverse osmosis technologies for water desal. That will represent 2/3 of our capacity. And the evidence of that is we already have a Tawila RO plant, which is under construction with a 200 million imperial gallons of water capacity, which would be the largest in the world. And TAQA is well placed to be a major player in also the green hydrogen, having experience in, like I said, the low cost solar and the scale of our desal water capacities, which are two key components of producing the green hydrogen. And we've made strong progress on that. We've announced 2 MOUs with 2 major entities in Abu Dhabi, one really supporting the shipping logistics, and the other one is supporting the manufacturing of steel with Emirates Steel. But it's not just about renewables, and we also need to look at energy efficiency from the demand side. It's not about just building more capacity. It's about addressing the demand side. And we've established a entity to really be focused on that, the Abu Dhabi Services Energy Company, which will play a big role in helping achieve our ambitions to reduce the demand side. And through that company, we've set targets from now and until 2030 with significant amount of investment, and really dealing and partnering with government entities to realize energy savings. And at Dhaka, our own ambitious targets for low carbon power and water is aligned closely, I would say, with the government of the UAE and with the region that we all live in. But also we recognize that we also have a duty to the communities that we serve in, here and outside of the region. And this means we have to move at a pace that ensures we can accelerate the energy transition and meeting the decarbonization target by leadership and the government. But at the same time, there needs to be a business case, it needs to be financially solid and strong, and also not compromising our energy, water, and security of supply. So we're on a journey, and we're almost there, and to make a more sustainable future. The need to learn from each other is also very important, and that is why Dhaka will be hosting the World Utility Congress in May next year here in Abu Dhabi, so that we can really share ideas and exchange knowledge with others around the world. And we must also play to our strengths in the UAE. As we all know, in this part of the world, there's an abundance of sunshine. There's a lot of desalination, water desalination expertise, and we have established strong relations, and our position as a trusted energy partner is very important for the markets to encourage the diversification and support the infrastructure. And we believe strongly in the energy transition, like I said, and which is evident in our support also for COP26 as a nation and as a company, and even as the UAE makes a bid to host COP28. So coming back to my view really on I would say net zero as an opportunity, it is not easy to achieve, but I do really believe it is a driver for new investment, job creation, and value creation for the UAE and for the region. And as Dhaka, we're really embracing this opportunity, and we're very excited about it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing some of your contributions towards the shift to a more diversified energy industry. Thanks for sharing that overview. I'd like to kind of, as the final segment of the introduction, I'd like to ask Mr. Binu Parthan, Head of Regions at IRENA, to please share some of his insights and thoughts as well.
Yeah, thanks very much, Shada, and thanks to the Energy Institute for inviting IRENA to share some of our thoughts, particularly to young professionals around. I have 2 teenage boys, and it's always challenging to hold their attention for more than 30 seconds. So it's always a great opportunity to talk to young people for more than a minute or so. We'll continue with this optimism which Dr. Jassim mentioned. At IRENA, we believe that energy transition brings significant opportunities. On my job, I do engage with all of IRENA membership, almost 180 plus countries, which are in different stages along the energy transition pathway. We do publish a flagship report, which is the World Energy Transition Outlook, which shows very clearly that we can, as a global community, achieve energy transition. We can achieve the 1.5 degree pathway with positive impacts. Of course, the impacts in different regions will vary, but as a global community, we can be achieving 1.5 degrees. And a major trend that we see is this spread of electrification. We are increasingly moving to an electrified world than one with direct use of fuels. And this is already happening with a lot of sectors, particularly housing, industry is getting electrified. And what we are seeing as we speak is the electrification of transport. And that's going to be quite revolutionary. It's already happening all over the world. It's happening in the Middle East, in Abu Dhabi, where we are based. And that will offer a lot of opportunities. There might be adjustments, structural, political, institutional adjustments that will be required, but that we believe is an opportunity because it does allow us to use resources much more efficiently. Beyond, and a lot of that electricity, in our analysis by 2050, about 90% of that electricity will be powered by renewables. And this is probably underlined in the report which came out of the US today, where the US sees that more than 90% of electricity can actually be powered by renewables, solar primarily, hydro, wind, others, etc. Another factor is also that we are all in the middle and probably towards the end of the pandemic. During the challenges which are posed by the pandemic, we saw that renewable energy capacity additions were actually at a record high last year. So that is not affecting renewable energy, and the renewable energy power capacity additions are actually 4 times what's actually being installed by other traditional fuels. So the point really, and some of those numbers that Dr. Jasim alluded to, like we are seeing very low record lows in terms of power prices, like 1.3 cents per kilowatt hour or so in the region in Abu Dhabi. And that's driven by very innovative mechanisms like auctions. We are increasingly seeing auctions coupled with energy storage, etc. So that's an exciting time to be here. Another thing that we see is really the cost. Now we do analyze the cost trends of auctions and real projects being built. And our analysis today shows that renewable energy is cheaper than the cheapest and the most advanced fossil fuel power plant today. And what is more interesting is that if you look at the operating power plants, almost 800 gigawatts of currently operating coal power plants actually cost more to operate than renewable energy investment. So the operating costs of these power plants are actually more than the investment required to, or rather the cost of generating renewable energy power in their place. So these are all opportunities which are there. Another question that we have always been asked is really, what about jobs and how will it affect jobs in the region or beyond? Our analysis globally shows that this will have positive socioeconomic benefits, including in jobs. We see significant increase in jobs powered by renewable energy, and also the flexibility relating to storage, electronic technology, etc. And for the region, we see, for example, we see that there could be a job loss of about less than 500,000 as an energy transition, but then the jobs which will be created will be about 1.5. So there is a threefold increase, or rather 3 jobs will be created for 1 job which is lost. But again, the point is that these jobs will require new skills and new technologies or new capabilities. So in a sense, I think a key point that I'd like to make to the energy professionals is to try to acquire skills which will stand the test of time, the energy transition over the 5 or 10 year period or so. And there are clearly emerging technologies that we see. Electrification of end users is one key. And also was alluded by several of the expert speakers that hydrogen is an interesting technology. We've seen major initiatives from Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other countries in the region, where green hydrogen produced from renewable energy, could actually be used to decarbonize some of the hard to decarbonize sectors, particularly industry, long distance transport, etc. So this is another opportunity. And another major opportunity is really the storage technologies, electrical storage, etc. So essentially, we believe that energy transition is a big opportunity for all the countries, and it is also an opportunity for the Middle East. There are several countries which are showing leadership in energy transition, and we are also working with a number of them. And a final point that I will also make is that we see the climate conferences as an opportunity, and all the countries in the region are signatories to the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And what we are doing with a number of these countries is to seize the opportunity offered by the nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. We are working with a number of countries in the region to work with them, provide our expertise, to work with them to increase their renewable energy ambition in their NDC commitments. which will then be driven by the local finance and as well as the international climate finance. So we are very excited with the opportunity offered by the energy transition, and we firmly believe that 1.5-degree pathway is feasible and with positive financial and socioeconomic benefits. And we work with all our members in the Middle East to achieve that. So I'll stop at that for the introduction, and happy to take on any questions that follow. Back to you, Shada.
Thanks a lot, Binu. Thank you. I think you highlighted a lot of opportunities that might be very relevant to the Middle East. And just as a follow-up to that statement, maybe I can just ask you one of the questions that we've been receiving, which is regarding some of the importance of the skills for young professionals and some of the capacity building and resources that you talked about as well. Just wondering if you believe that enough is really being done to equip our young professionals today with the skills that they need to tackle climate change in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Shada. Probably more needs to be done. It's a very dynamic situation. Innovations which are shaping the energy transition are numerous, and they are changing all the time. IRENA does publish innovation landscape, which we've tracked almost 30 types of innovation. And often when you talk about skills, people talk about technologies, energy conversion technologies, and the skills associated with that. But there are skills required for innovative market design, innovations in policy and regulation, aspects such as how to price carbon into the decision making, etc. So, so by nature, because of the dynamism of the energy transition and the associated climate action, it's difficult for the education and skill development sector to catch up with that. And that's, from that sense, not enough is being done. But then certainly there are a lot more with the pandemic. We have seen a lot of virtual learning opportunities for e-learnings, etc. And some of those platforms are providing opportunities for young professionals, energy professionals to acquire skills. But again, a key component is really the skills that you acquire with practice, applying this in a real world setting in the context of a project or in an institution or so. So that is also an important factor. So again, more needs to be done, and there are a lot of institutions. There are some in the UAE, here in Abu Dhabi. We are based in Masdar City in Abu Dhabi, and there is a Masdar Institute for Science and Technology, which is looking at some of these in the region. And there are others in the region as well, which are looking at cutting edge innovations in energy, in robotics, in information technology, etc. But again, there needs to be more, and there will need to be opportunities which are non-conventional in the sense, going beyond the typical classroom and university environment. And so there I see a good opportunity for innovators to be active in this space, providing kind of skills, imparting skills and training and equipping the young generation for the roles of the future. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Dr. Mirza, if you would like to add anything on the opportunities, whether from a technology perspective or resources, capabilities, and so on. I know you touched upon it a bit in your introduction, but if anything you'd like to elaborate on, we'd be happy to hear.
Well, we are using, of course, technology. The reason Sustainable Energy Authority was established, it was established by a royal decree from His Majesty the King. This was done in October 2019 to make sure we look at the new technologies and, upskilling our youth in the new sustainable era. So for example, in Sustainable Energy Authority, we conducted 6 training sessions free of charge for young boys and girls to be professionals in sustainable energy, like solar installations, etc. Also, we are looking at every aspect, like, for example, green hydrogen is now the new trend. I mean, you hear everybody talks about green hydrogen. So we want to learn more about that. We look at how to capture wasted heat and reuse it for energy. So there are many opportunities. And we are also installing solar panels on rooftop of the schools, because we want the young people to be more aware that there is a change now in the world, that the environment is very important, safeguarding the environment, using renewable energy more, reducing emissions. All this awareness campaign we are doing now to achieve what our national targets are, and hopefully we can make our share in this respect.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Mirza. Another topic we wanted to use this opportunity to discuss, particularly when you talk about technologies, is the climate for investment in low carbon technologies. The key ones that come to mind are carbon capture and storage, low carbon hydrogen, renewables, efficiency, of course, amongst many others. So maybe let me direct the first question at Tim. If you could comment on the global, what do you believe the global climate for investment in these technologies is?
Thanks very much, Piotr. I mean, there's a few things to say. I mean, first of all, if we just look at the numbers, then on an average year, about $2 trillion goes into investment worldwide in the energy sector. And of that inflow of capital to the energy sector, about 600 billion goes to clean energy. And then there's infrastructure, and then there is fossil fuels. So renewable power is around 300 billion, and then the rest is various efficiency gains. And then there's a very small slither of some of these emerging technologies, which we are talking a lot about. But for the moment, there's not a huge amount of capital going into carbon capture, utilization, and storage, or to low carbon hydrogen. There's a lot of excitement, particularly for low carbon hydrogen. And there's the amounts that are being spent there are picking up. But really, for those types of investments to grow quickly, you need an alignment not only of willingness from the private sector, but you need this sort of triangular alignment from the investors in the infrastructure, the users, and the policies. So you need to have this quite strong dialogue amongst different participants in the process in order to get some of these emerging technologies off the ground. Now, there are some quite promising signs in that respect, that companies are starting to put money into these technologies. And one example for CCUS is, a few years ago, we used to talk much more about CCUS on coal-fired power stations. What we're talking much more now about is industrial clusters, sometimes port cities. You can see examples of that in Europe. You can see examples in the Middle East too, about how you can benefit from some economies of scale by looking at different industries that are energy intensive and that can share some of the infrastructure required to capture and store carbon. So I think that's quite an exciting area. And clearly, when it comes to low carbon hydrogen, one of the really difficult issues is what's the use case? Who is going to be paying the premium for that product? And you, again, need an alignment amongst policy. You need to find consumers who, for different reasons, will be willing to make those kinds of decisions in order to get some of those projects moving. But we are personally at the IEA optimistic about the role of some of those low carbon molecules in the energy system. And because something we have to have in mind is that although there is a point of view that says that it's all about electricity, the future, the transition, And indeed, low carbon electricity is going to play a massive role in the change in the power sector. I mean, in the change in the energy sector. But in our analysis of a net zero energy system in 2050, half of the final consumption comes from electrons. The other half still comes from molecules of different types, and particularly gases. And so working out how we transform that molecule delivery, so gases, liquids, solids, from what we have today to what we'll need in the future is another massive task.
Great, thank you, Tim. I mean, and thank you also for the statistics. It's great to be able to put this into perspective. Jassim, what are your views on the investment climate for low carbon technologies in the Middle East and UAE? You've mentioned the TAQA's investments into green hydrogen and one of the largest renewables projects in the world. We also have one question in our Q&A. Someone posted, do you believe, and if then when, the investments in low carbon technologies and renewables will surpass investments in fossil fuels in the Middle East?
Yeah, no, look, I mean, in terms of the Middle East and Abu Dhabi, maybe just taking a step back when it comes to overall the energy and the utility sector. I mean, it's been over 15 years now since the power and water was privatized, where your typical generation being solar or water desal, high efficient water desal, where you have a 40% international investor developer comes in, like the likes of NG or EDF, major international utility players coming in, investing in these projects. And also with these projects, typically you have highly leveraged international project financing from international banks or consortiums. So there is a strong appetite when it comes to investing in utilities, and more specifically the low carbon or renewables. And for examples like in Abu Dhabi, in terms of that we have the right ingredients or the right recipe for investments. A few examples is Abu Dhabi's commitment of creating a sustainable finance hub. We've seen that with the Abu Dhabi Global Markets, which is closely aligned with the UAE initiatives. Also, recently, we've seen the Department of Finance in Abu Dhabi announce a green bond to accelerate initiatives through partnerships with the Abu Dhabi stock markets. So we see all the ingredients in there, and we see the demand. I mean, TAQA, I mean, taking it maybe a step back, TAQA was created to drive that initiative. It was a reverse merger with Abu Dhabi Power, and there's a significant amount of renewable projects in the pipeline. Abu Dhabi has created the investment atmosphere and appetite, especially for international investors. TAQA is one of it's a listed entity on the stock market, where 49% of the company can be owned by foreign investors, and we're seeing a very competitive market when it comes to renewables. The Al Dhafra solar plant that we're building now, it's a 2 gigawatts of PV. I mean, it's gigantic. And with a very competitive tariff of 1.3 or 1.32 US cents per kilowatt, I truly believe we'll see more of these opportunities presenting themselves for international investors in the region, and more specifically in the UAE.
Thank you. That sounds like really exciting developments coming up in the next years.
Thank you for that. I think we heard earlier from Your Excellency on some of the emerging action plans, some of the roadmaps and so on in Bahrain. Maybe I'd like to ask Binu to share some of his insights more on the region. What are some of the emerging policy frameworks across the Middle East And how does that kind of help and support in meeting net zero?
Yeah, thank you. So we've been seeing a lot of interest in renewable electricity, and as was referred to by several panelists before, Middle East does have significant renewable energy resources. So we are seeing an interest in electricity or renewable power investments. But then these, if you look at, I mean, today morning we were talking to one of our other member countries, Malaysia, which is also in a sense, a lot of the economic development in Malaysia was built on the basis of fossil fuels. But today the country was discussing with us a target of about 60% or so from renewables. So let's compare that with the Middle East now. So we are only at about 7% renewables. So there is a significant opportunity space here. And something which needs to happen is to have policy frameworks which clearly recognize the opportunity offered by renewable energy and the design of markets to actually facilitate that. We've seen really world record breaking renewable energy PPA prices which are offered in actions in the region. And that's just the start. And obviously there is, as was alluded to by His Excellency, there's significant engineering and construction capability in the region. So that could be directed towards renewable energy project development in the region or beyond. So there could be some sort of an industrial policy, a green industrial policy or so, which could incubate and support new energy promising technologies. So that could be something. And another possibility is also having a carbon price signal. We are in discussions with Indonesia, which will assume the chair of G20 next year. And they've recently taken to their parliament a carbon tax, which will essentially allow them to meet the Paris Agreement commitment. So having a carbon price signal will also help in bringing, monetizing some of the externalities relating to Paris Agreement related climate mitigation benefits. And that will also provide a financial incentive for a drive for some of the renewable energy projects as well. So which are probably not coming forth, not competitive, etc. So these are some of the thoughts, essentially. A clear policy framework, a green industrial policy perhaps, and having a carbon price signal. Some of these elements in varying degrees could actually help the region. And a final point is also beyond the NDCs and the Paris Agreement, there is also an opportunity for countries to submit their long-term strategies. These are strategies as to how countries will decarbonize and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. We've seen that a number of leading countries, I mean, Europe has committed to carbon neutrality by 2050. US has followed suit, and we've even seen that China will achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. So using the long-term strategies, looking at the sector-wide, not just the energy sector, but going beyond that to industrial sector, agriculture and others, and creating an LTS is another way where you are able to see very clearly what are the structural changes which are required, where the policy and regulatory interventions are required as well. And this again, IRENA is now starting to work with one of our member countries on an LTS. It's not in the region, but beyond the region. So we believe that looking at the long term, taking a long-term view on decarbonization and net zero will also be able to clearly show which are the sectors where interventions, policy, regulatory, taxation incentives are required, and then could target them. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I think you've shared quite a bit on some of the structures that can help in meeting net zero commitments for some of the countries in the region. Dr. Mirza, I'm not sure if you'd like to share some of your thoughts, or whether it's about policies or more about the investment climates as well. Please feel free to share some of your insights as well.
Thank you, Shada. I like to go back quickly to a question which Piotr put to my dear friend Jasim. At the end, he said, somebody asked, when the investment in renewable exceed investment in fossil fuel. Now, at the last IRENA, International Renewable Energy General Assembly in January 2018, they displayed a chart which showed what are the new capacities over the last many years, whether it is fossil fuel or renewable or clean energy. And it showed that the investment for new capacity for fossil fuel exceeded clean energy up to 2015, 2016. After that, all the new investment, the investment in renewable or clean energy exceeded the fossil fuel. So there is a total world change. In the Middle East, it hasn't happened yet that way because we have fossil fuel, and many of the leaders in the Middle East feel still we have to have a mixture of sort of sources of energy. For example, we will have fossil fuel and renewable, whilst UAE, JASM, they have lots of sorts of other diversification like nuclear, like clean coal. They are looking at green hydrogen, renewable. So there is a change in that. What I'm saying is that the Middle East now, like I said earlier, there is a change in mindset. There are young leaderships at the helm, and they see what's happening and they are reacting. So for example, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they announced NEOM. NEOM is really futuristic, city, or whatever you like to call it. And NEOM stands new, new in Latin, and M for Medina. So it's a new city, and it's all green, and it's all using clean energy and new technologies. The Green Middle East Initiative, they want to plant 50 million trees to reduce 50 billion trees to reduce the gas emissions. 10 billion of that will come from the GCC and 40% from the Middle East. So there is now a shift in the thinking, and we should realize that, for example, in the maybe when COP22 in Paris took place, there was a different approach by the Middle East countries to what's being discussed about the targets, and because they were concerned how much it will cost them to clean their fossil fuel, and some of them felt that clean energy is competitive to fossil fuel. That is changing, and I think in future you will see that they are more forthcoming at these COP26, and that's why the UAE held this in April 2021, this preliminary COP26, which prepared for COP26.
Thank you so much for picking up on that last part of the question, Dr. Mirza. I have another question for Tim. Tim, I think we can all agree that the 2050 net zero target is necessary but very ambitious, and to achieve that, the next decade will be critical. Do you think that we are moving quick enough to achieve that? And also, given the required speed, what are the risks to oil-dependent economies, given the rapid, global shift away from oil?
Yeah, thanks very much, Piotr. So the first part of your question, are we moving quickly enough? I mean, unfortunately, the answer is relatively easy to provide, and it's no, we're not. We at the IEA have been emphasizing obviously the tragedy of the public health situation over the last 18 months, but also this possibility to build sustainability into our notions of recovery. That has been done in part, but if we look at all of the money that's been raised by governments around the world to support the process of recovery. So altogether, that's around $16 trillion, primarily in advanced economies. But of that sum, only a very small portion has gone towards cleaner energy. And so we are not on track. And in fact, if you look at the way that trends in 2021 are developing, for instance, in the power sector, we will see this year another record year for renewables. But electricity demand is surging, and the balance is being made up. I mean, renewables are accounting for a lot of that extra demand, but the balance is really coming from coal-fired power plants, often in, and many of those are in Asia. So the result is 2021, we are likely to see the second largest increase in global CO2 emissions in history. So that is clearly not on track for the sorts of dramatic reductions that we need to see. However, we do think there are reasons to imagine that with the right policy push, with the continued evolution of global technologies, that we can turn things around. But for that to happen, this decade, the 2020s, would need to be a decade of massive deployment of the clean energy technologies that are ready for the big time. And by that, I mean the ones that we talked about. All sorts of efficient technologies, all sorts of clean energy technologies, particularly in the power sector, where, as we've discussed, these are often the most cost competitive technologies for new generation, especially if you have, in a sense, a level playing field for them, and you do not tilt that playing field in favor of fossil fuels through various subsidies and so on. However, we shouldn't imagine that we have everything that we need. So there are some technologies that we know that we will need post 2030 at scale, and we need to be spending this decade also to bring those costs down as well. And again, we've discussed many of the elements in play: low carbon fuels, some of the big CCUS projects, to try and get those costs into a place where we can roll them out, at scale a little bit further down the road. And there's also elements of the electrification of our energy systems that are still not ready in the market. You can't go out tomorrow and buy a large electric truck. You can buy a medium-sized one, you can buy one for light commercial vehicles, but you can't do the heavy freight yet. So we need solutions there, and they could come from electricity if we have further advancements in battery technology. They could also come from hydrogen fuel cells, and there's various other options there, but we need additional work to get those costs down.
Great, thank you. Would any other panelists like to comment on the pace of achieving the net zero target by 2050 and the required technologies?
I could, Peter.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the change will be driven by some of the major economies, the G20 in particular, plus others, because they do account for the major share of emissions and the major energy economies as well. So there we see some clear signals, including with a number of countries. And going forward in COP26, we do expect to see some major announcements regarding coal phase out. So that will be a major step forward. If countries do commit to phase out coal-based power generation in the several years ahead, that'll be a major step forward. But there are challenges though. But again, achieving 1.5 degree the Paris Agreement objective will take a lot more political will. And I believe as we are seeing more and more instances of extreme weather events, floods, which was thought to be once in a century happening more frequently, our food security being affected, water security being affected, etc., there is already a political recognition. And as was alluded to by the speakers, with new and open leadership coming across the world, there is a more recognition that we need to be, there is no planet B. We need to really take responsibility for the way we consume things, including electricity. And I believe that it will happen. But then the focus needs to be on the larger economies, larger consumers of energy and larger economies. And there could be some positivities that I see. And there are parts of the world which haven't really contributed to this climate problem. And I think rest of the world should provide them that space, what they call as the carbon space, for them to continue to develop. So I think with a focused effort and a political will at that level, I remain quite hopeful. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Vinu. I like your positive tone around the topic. I'm sure together we can achieve that goal.
I'd like to kind of shift now the conversation around COP26, especially as we're in the lead up to COP26, and a lot of leadership is discussing conversation around committing to net zero. Now, maybe I'd like to see if anyone has any thoughts to share about how high they think net zero is on the agenda and what would success actually look like in commitment from other countries here in the region. I'll open the floor for anyone who'd like to share some of their thoughts to this question.
Maybe I can say a couple of words, but obviously very interested to hear the views of my fellow panelists. I think there'll be a few big topics and big issues that people are looking for progress on at the upcoming COP26. I mean, this is what the presidency says. One of the key elements is, keeping the door to a 1.5 degree stabilization open. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion around the level of ambition in the nationally determined contributions, how far they get us towards that goal. Clearly, the analysis produced by ourselves and others suggests that there is still a very large ambition gap between what individual countries have pledged and what would need to be achieved to get us on track for a 1.5 degrees. So that's going to be a huge issue there. And as my colleague from IRENA was saying, there's going to be a big focus on coal and trying to mobilize coalitions that will move the world more quickly away from the most carbon intensive fuel. I think another huge issue on the agenda is going to be finance. We are increasingly worried at IEA about the disparity in terms of trends in clean energy investment that we see around the world, and particularly many developing economies lack the means, to some degree, lack the policy momentum, but at a moment where public health worries are still ever present, that process of changing the capital flows is not going fast enough. So for us, that becomes a big fault line in the move to address climate and sustainable development issues. And so there's a clear role there for an international catalyst to try and generate additional flows of capital in support of energy transitions. Of course, everyone's aware that some years ago, advanced or developed economies committed themselves to $100 billion per year in climate finance. That's now a question of trust. Is the developed world really going to deliver on those promises? And I think that's going to be front and center in the COP discussions as well. And I'd like to just put one additional element in the mix. I think adaptation and Article 6, so these international carbon trade, that's going to be a big part of it. But there's another thing that I personally feel is very important. Is like, do we have the metrics that we need to measure progress towards our sustainable development goals? And I think there's some initiatives now to bring a little bit more coherence and standardization to the numbers that we use to measure that progress, particularly when it comes to corporate commitments. And I think that's going to be another important area.
Thank you, Tim. Dr. Mirza, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts, especially on how high you think net zero is on everyone's agenda. I know that you talked about the leadership really looking for sustainable development and really looking into solutions and action plans and roadmaps. But when it comes to, committing to net zero, how high do you think that is on everyone's agenda in the region?
Well, it depends on the country and the region. But if we look, say, I think Bino maybe is more aware, knows more about this. There are 24 or 25 countries who have committed to 27 countries who have committed to zero emissions by 2050. And China, for the first time, have committed by 2060. So the number of countries is growing in the world. Maybe a few years back, there were only 5 countries, but it is growing. In the Middle East, so far, nobody is talking about zero emissions for the country as a whole. But for example, on sectorial basis or on projects, there are plans to do zero emissions, but not as a total country. And one reason for that is abundance of fossil fuel, which is relatively cheap and it's in abundance. And therefore there is reluctance, that there is a risk that because fossil fuel was the source of revenue for the Middle East and GCC, about 70 to 80% of their revenue comes from fossil fuel. So they don't want to put that at risk. Although now, with the recent changes, you can see Saudi Arabia wants 50% of their electricity by 2030 from renewable. Joe Biden wants 100% by 2035. And there are countries who are already 100% clean energy. And like I said, many countries are banning now gasoline and diesel. Some reinsurance companies are also have announced that they will not reinsure fossil fuel-based assets. So all the power stations which are being built in the Gulf, because if this private consortium, they signed for 25 years, in 30 years, if other insurance companies join them, nobody will be reinsuring these. So all these will change. I think, like I said, there is a change in the mindset and it will come. But so far, I haven't heard anybody in the Middle East who's talking about net zero as a country.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and honest opinion. Thanks a lot. We have just a bit of time left, so perhaps I'll ask everyone to make some closing remarks, 1 or 2 minutes or so. I'd like to ask Binu to please start sharing his closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Shada, and thanks again for inviting Irina to share some thoughts. We remain optimistic, and we are optimistic. In about 10 days, 12 days, there's going to be the first or the second high-level dialogue on energy, which is called by the UN Secretary General. And there we see for the first time that the SDG 7, the energy sector targets, have been linked to net zero. So anything which is to do with energy is now linked to net zero. And that is going to have political commitment. So we are working with a number of countries, groups of countries, to come up with energy compacts, which will not just ensure energy achievement of energy SDGs, but also consistency with net zero. So there is a momentum and it's happening at different levels. And we remain optimistic that this will all culminate in a significant commitments at COP. There are a lot of regions which are leading at COP as well. As I referred to and as Tim mentioned, we see significant commitments in phasing down coal. We expect to see some sort of financing facility for early retirement of coals, which will aid renewable energy and the transition to net zero. Another important thing that Tim mentioned is fixing international climate finance. The international climate finance hasn't actually worked in the way it should have, not for renewable energy or energy transition. And there is a need to scale up international climate finance, but also improve the targeting and efficiency of the delivery of international climate finance. So these are some of the things that we hope to see. we remain optimistic, and we work with all our partners in the region to supporting them. And I'd also like to just indicate that we are working with a country in the Middle East on considering their net zero trajectory. And we hope that that is something that we can announce in the near future with the country, hopefully around COP26 or so. So we remain quite optimistic on our energy transition and the benefits it will bring. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps I'd like to ask Mr. Jassim for his final thoughts.
Yeah, so again, thank you for having us. And I would say, honestly, I mean, we are going to see more investments in the region, in the green and sustainable activities. And we see businesses delivering on projects, more specifically our target and pipeline of projects and our penetration in renewables and more efficient water desal by 2030 in the coming years. There will also be more opportunities for refinancing. We'll see that, and also green bonds. I also believe that we'll see more players here taking a major role in climate action and decarbonization. We will also see continued and sustainable growth in renewables, clean technologies, and hydrogen, green hydrogen becoming cost efficient and being able to compete with blue hydrogen in the short future. And we'll see more countries in the region will articulate these targets or revise their targets. And we'll see more companies like TAQA embarking on ESG and also embarking on certain carbon emission targets in the future. And more importantly, we see that this region is committed to achieving targets. And I think by 2030, we will see significant progress when it comes to clean energy and energy efficiency targets. And I would expect us to be on track to achieve those or even exceed them in the future. So again, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Your Excellency, any final thoughts and insights?
Yes, certainly. I think to see the change, the pace of change, only about 15 years ago, none of the GCC countries had announced any national targets for clean energy or energy efficiency. Now, all the 6 countries have targets. And Saudi Arabia, which has the second largest crude reserve in the world, because it's a fossil fuel, they have 266 billion barrels of proven reserves. So it lasts for many years to come. But they have one of the most ambitious sort of plans now to go for clean energy. It shows that there is a shift, and the pace of shift is going to go much faster. And like I think Bino was saying, we looked at some statistics just in the last 6 years, from January 2015 to April 2020, to see the cost per kilowatt hour, how much it has come down in the last 6 years for solar PV for major projects. In January 2015, there is a solar farm, a stage 2 solar farm of Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum. The cost per kilowatt hour was 5.85 cents per kilowatt hour. It came down, then it went to Suehan, which Jassim mentioned. I visited Suehan. They have 3.2 million solar panels laid out. And that is, like you say, they will double that with Al-Dhafra. Now, Al-Dhafra is 1.32. So 82% reduction in solar PV for major projects in 6 years, only the last 6 years. So what I'm saying is the change is happening very fast. And I think we in the Middle East, we will be following this because of change in the mindsets that's coming and also because of the whole changes around the world.
Thank you for that. Thanks a lot. Tim, any final words and remarks from your side?
Thank you, Shada, and thanks very much to fellow panelists. And I mean, I agree with this feeling of that things are moving, and they need to move quickly, because the outside world is moving fast as well, and the climate is changing. And we need to recognize that we have to see some fundamental changes in the way that the world produces and consumes energy. I think the final thought from my side would be how it's very important for the countries around the world, and indeed for the transition to engage with the main resource holders, the main fossil fuel producing countries. And because if we don't make this a collaborative, cooperative exercise, and then we risk new divisions, we risk even, implications for the stability of energy markets, and for other, unnecessarily disruptive impacts of this process of change. So we need to bring people onto the inside of that discussion. That's why, for us, this dialogue that indeed we've been having all day today with different representatives of Middle East and North Africa is so important. I think we have to be very aware of some demographic and generational aspects here. Middle East is a region with one of the youngest and fastest growing populations in the world. So we have to find new opportunities there that are not dependent on oil revenues. And I'm reminded now that I failed to answer Piotr's early question about the impact of declining oil revenues. But that is a very real prospect, again, depending on how fast this process goes. But we need to be aware that that is something that could well be a feature of the not distant future for energy markets. And we need to prepare ourselves for that day. Thanks very much.
Excellent, thank you. And unfortunately, we're already at the top of the hour. I'm sure this conversation could go on for much longer. And let me apologize to the audience that we haven't managed to answer all of the questions in the Q&A. Maybe we'll find a way to relay them to the speakers offline, we'll see. But look, it's been a huge privilege to have all of you as our guest speakers today. I think we've heard about a big set of challenges, but also huge opportunities. So thank you to Tim Gould, His Excellency, Dr. Abdul Mirza, Jassim Hussain Tabet, and Bino Parthan. And also, of course, thank you to our audience that have joined online. I'm sure, a year into the pandemic, everybody has this, what you call a webinar fatigue. So I really appreciate your time, and I hope you've learned a lot and enjoyed this event. I just have two final responsibilities before we close this webinar. Maybe I'll ask Robin to show the slide on the screen. What you see there is that I'd like to thank our supporting partners and networks who are backing Generation 2050 and this super important intergenerational dialogue. Their names will be coming up on the screen. So that's our partners and networks who have been instrumental in helping us put together this Generation 2050 manifesto, which of course I would strongly encourage everyone to take a look at, read through it, engage with it and engage with us, and stay tuned for the next for the next activities related to Generation 2050. We will be holding 2 more of these roundtables in the run-up to COP26. This was the first one in a series. The following will be led by our colleagues in Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore, Nigeria, and London. And they'll be taking place on the 24th of September and the 20th of October. Since you've registered for this event, you will be receiving invitations to those. So looking forward to seeing you there. Once again, huge thank you to all of our speakers, and have a great afternoon. And to those in the Middle East, have a great weekend too. With that, we'll close the webinar. Thank you.